Hello, today we're going to show you the separation of powers. Now PCI says that a developer should not be able to write code and put it all the way into production. So how do you stop that from happening if they have admin access, they have access to the code, to the libraries, and they can push things to production? Well, I'm going to show you what the difference is from an environment that is PCI compliant from a separation of powers perspective. Now, so let's say you have, and actually, the way it's kind of the boards work, it actually always helps out. So you've got your dev here, okay, and then you've got your testers, right? And then you've got maybe another role here that is push to production, right? Or deployment. Okay, so how do you control, right, just kind of more clearly putting in here, the segregation between these roles, right? You have some developer, maybe even before that you have maybe project management and requirements, right? So when a developer gets requirements, they have a certain amount of information that they need to go to code, design, build the application. Okay, so what PCI wants and what DSS is looking for is that this person cannot push to deploy. So the access control has to be in place where there cannot be someone who cannot push it all the way to production. So let's just talk about your environments, right? So maybe you do have a dev environment, you have a test environment, we'll call this prod, right? Okay, so the way you separate the environments is that application developers do not have the ability to either push to test or push to production. So what happens is you give them the ability to push and sort of check in their code, right? So they check in their code to GitHub, to whatever type of repository that they do, and then what happens is those who are going to test that application can grab that code and put it into a test environment, right? So they're going to grab that code, they're going to go through a test cycle, another test cycle, and maybe they're going to go back and say, hey, this isn't great enough, and there's different iterations there. So once the test team is responsible for that environment, there has to be that checks and balances between the groups. Now when test says, okay, we've got a piece of code, it's ready to go, we've tested in test environments, ready to go. So they have the ability to then push to either production or stage or another environment. Now what also PCI recommends is that there's a sort of management is notified, right? So you can't have a tester, a developer, be in sort of in cahoots and put this into production, and all of a sudden you've got the code that is malicious or does something to siphon off credit cards or information, or PI, or anything like that. So in this process, right, there has to be a decision point that goes to management. So they have to say sort of yes or no. So that way, not just a developer can't push to production, but a tester can't push to production or edit with the developer. So now you have kind of three different, checksums to make sure that the production is safe from any changes that go through. So the one way you can control this is by access control, right? So you make sure that they don't have the ability to push to this environment. So you put a stop there where they cannot have the ability. So whatever system you're using, if you're using an automated system or using, there's several different types of systems you can use to be able to control the factor and have access control specifically for development teams. Now, test teams, as long as they're in that process and they don't do any coding, that's the specific, prerequisite that they're not developers. Now, you can get creative and you can have a development team that is coding a certain section of code that they didn't develop. Then their testing could be a code review. You can do different types of things so long as from a systematic you can pull out from this system whatever this is okay, you have a report that has every single access control that is listed by that team, and make sure that you have the evidence that you can show PCI specifically that these developers cannot push anything to production by an access control level that they can't change themselves as well, right? You can't make them an admin and be able to control the whole piece. Now, also, your management team, okay, and your testers, and maybe deployment team, they don't have the ability to change that access control either. There has to be a place where that access control is controlled by a same process of an approval, where not just one person can give a developer access to do everything and then take it away, right? They're going to want to see the tracking of that access control and the change log of that access control. That way you can go back and say, these developers never had access to push anything to production, and they don't currently have the ability to do so. And you have a log that you can put out from the system, Jenkins or all different types of systems. So I mean, I don't want to specifically call out any system. It's up to you, whatever system you want to use. The most important thing is that you have that export to show PCI a report if they ask you for that report, or show that as evidence for that ACL. Everything you do within PCI revolves around having controls in place that you can put out a report that you can say that this is under control. The most important thing is that the credit card companies do not want you to set up your system, your environment, your IT to be able to have gaps where someone can do something malicious and pull credit card information or PII or anything that can actually be used for fraudulent purposes, right? So they want to make sure that every single company has something like this, and this is really what is called separation of powers. We'll go a little bit deeper into that in another area, but I just want to have you understand the specifics of what PCI is looking for when they talk about separation of power.